All right, then I'm going to continue on. I'm on page 178. How to script text box, text area, and select objects. Again, not my goal here to go over what each one of those things mean because we have talked about them in previous classes. But when you come over here and I'm going up to page 179, as it says, the value property in these types, for a text box or a text area or a select box, that's the actual value. It's either what you've entered or what you've chosen. Does that make sense? And typically, that's what you're going to be concerned with. All right? And you'll notice that virtually all of the time in here, I've mentioned this to you before, but I'm saying it again, the name property and the ID property are going to be the same. The name property is what you will be using a year from now in Node.js. So the name property is used on the server side when you send it to another machine. The ID property is used on the client side on your machine. And again, when you've got a form or whatever and you are validating the form, what you do is you validate it first on the client side, on your side, with your code. Then you send it over to a server. And guess, anybody want to take a wild guess over what the first thing they do with it is? They validate it again. Because just because you said the stuff was valid doesn't mean that their server is going to think that it's valid. But by you validating it on the client side, you're not making the server look at it where it might be bad to begin with. At least as far as you're concerned on your end, everything is valid. Now, it might be that on the user's end, or on the server side, maybe, for example, maybe all you do put in for a first name is it has to be a value in there. There has to be something in it. Maybe they say that it has to be letters. Something like that. It just depends. They might run almost the same exact checks that you run. They might run totally different checks. My guess is that the same checks that I would have you write for a form are not going to be the same checks that Amazon would put if you fill out a form for them. All right? So then notice JavaScript code to get. Now we're getting it, so we're grabbing it. So again, it's appearing on the right-hand side of an equal sign. All right? Then we've got on the left-hand side of the equal sign. Guess what? You have already seen stuff like this when we clear something out. We've done this kind of thing already. So the name of the control dot value, I should say the ID of the control dot value equals, in that case, double quote, double quote. If I want to be able to grab what somebody put in, all right, there's an example right there. So they're assuming that you've got a field called country. Why would you want to do that? Well, again, as far as I know, Amazon will take money from anywhere in the world, And if somebody is buying something from, I don't know, Brazil, and I don't even know what their currency is there. Let's say it's pesos. I don't know what it is. But if they can provide it, or they've got a credit card, their money is just as good as yours or mine. All right? But their tax situation, for example, the way it's handled might be totally different. That might be why you do something like this. You might process something totally different for the United States as opposed to South America, as opposed to Canada, etc. So as it says, typically, the name and the ID attributes for all your controls, typically, they contain the same value. After you use the value property on one of them to get the actual value itself, you can use the length to get the number of characters in the string, if that's something you need to do. Again, why would you maybe need to do that? Well, I could check the length. For example, one of the things I could check, let's say, would be the length of the phone number. If it's 3, that's not going to be a valid phone number as far as I know any place, except I suppose 911. All right, but if you're asking someone for their phone number and it's different, again, looking at what we just looked at up here, phone numbers, for example, in Mexico might be totally different than phone numbers here. All right, I believe a lot of international numbers start with like 011. They've got different codes and stuff in there. So as it says, setting the value replaces the text contents. Setting the value property in here selects the object with the appropriate or corresponding values. So if you've got a drop-down list, is what they're saying. When the user presses the enter key while typing in a text area, a hard return is entered into the text. What does that mean? Remember, those text areas can have multiple rows? And they're saying each time you hit enter, you're physically putting a line break in there. All right, so that actually gets saved as part of what you're typing in. All right, when the user types past the end of a line in the text area, the new line should automatically do a word wrap. Okay, so you should be able to see it. And the only bad thing is, a lot of times, maybe you've seen this, if you fill out a form and the text area is real big, and you're like, geez, all I want to do is type in a couple words. I do that with Muroc all the time. I'll say something like, hey, this is the newest version of your book. We are going to it in fall, but I'd like a copy now. Something like that. But they've got a text area that's this big. Why? Because somebody might have something really big that they want to write in there. All right. Radio buttons and checkboxes, even though these are different, you know this. Radio buttons are typically put in a group and you can only select one of them, correct? All right, so if we had something here, I might say, as an example, first year or second year student type of thing like that. You could be one or you could be the other. All right, at a 4-year college, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior type of thing. All right, but if I do something like anything that brings in an element where you could have more than one, that's going to be a checkbox, right? Best time to contact you. I went to a seminar on retirement last week, and the guy, they gave a hard copy of this form, and they said, when would be the best time to contact you? And they had it broken up into about 5 or 6 different areas. Or in parentheses right after it said, check all that are that apply. All right, that wouldn't be a radio button. Okay. All right, so as it says, here's the code for 2 radio buttons. Now notice this is one place where it differs. With radio buttons, as you notice here, the name is the same, the ID is different. It has to be. The name has to be the same so it knows it's a radio button group, but the ID must be different because it's got to know which button you're actually selecting. All right, I mean, I suppose you could make something really ugly, and you could probably make, for example, a thing that had the states in it. And if you had all 50 states, you could have 10 rows with 5 each or 5 rows with 10 each. And you could actually set it up with radio buttons. That would be really ugly, but you could do it. All right. Here's the JavaScript code as it says, to get the radio button and the checkbox value. All right. So a checkbox here, accept type of thing. But notice it's done almost exactly the same. Now, they put this in here for brevity. They put it all on the same line. But typically, you'd have that contact equals $text.value or whatever on a new line all by itself. All right? But you should be able to look at this. This should make sense to you. All right? This should make sense to you. var accept equals checked. Guess what accept is going to be? True or false? True if you checked it, false if you didn't. All right, and notice here, have you ever done that where you're reading some kind of a form or you're doing something and it says check here to accept our terms and conditions, and you don't check it, you click the button to go on? Typically, it'll tell you can't. That's the kind of thing they're talking about right here. Does that make sense? So, as it says, all radio buttons in a group have the same name but must have different IDs. Only one radio button may be checked at a time, but none has to be checked. One thing about that, you can use the checked property, and sometimes people do. So, I mean, gender is the most popular one. Now, it used to always be male, female. Now they have, sometimes they'll have male, female, other, or they'll have male, female, prefer not to answer. All right, but let's just assume male, female. All right, and not to be mean to you, but if you look around this campus, there's probably, if there's 400 people that go here, my guess is there's about 375 males. So they probably would default a gender here to male. All right. If we went to another school that was prominently female, you'd reverse it. That's all. You don't have to do that, but it just makes it a little bit easier. Plus, One thing that happens when you do select the radio button option, 1 is always selected. It may not be the one that you should have selected, but 1 is always selected. And you can, C-A-N, do the same thing with checkboxes if you want to. You can default 1 or more because they're checkboxes if you want to do that. So each checkbox is independent of the other one. So if I say, hey, I'm going to contact you during the break, what's the best way? And I say email, text, phone call, etc. You might want, well, just to be sure, I want all 3. And what do I mean by that? Well, have you ever noticed that when the Rankin notification system, I get an email and I get a text? That's good. That way I know that if for some reason one's down, hopefully I'll get it through the other one. All right. All right. Again, to select the radio button, you set its check property to true. To clear a radio button, you set its check property to false. To select a checkbox, you set its check property to true. So even though they're not the same thing, they're handled in a very similar way, code-wise. All right. All right. How to use the methods and events for forms and controls. I would suggest, again, reading this for when you take your test. This section, I would suggest reading the whole thing. All right. But when you click the submit button on a form, as it says, it attempts to call a submit routine that submits the form and the data to the server. What does that mean? That means that what you set action to, remember how earlier they said action equals something.php? When you click submit, it's going to attempt to submit it to that server. All right? Reset. A lot of people have a misunderstanding of what reset is. Reset does not clear out everything. No. Reset sets everything to their default values. So if your default state is please enter a state and you click reset, that's what it's going to set it to. But if you've defaulted it to Missouri because most people here are from Missouri and you click reset, it's going to set it to Missouri. All right, there's a big difference between those. We've talked before about focus and blur. I've mentioned this example to you. If you have a super simple form, 2 fields in it, name, email. All right? If I'm in the name field and I hit tab and I haven't put anything in there, 2 events take place. A blur when I leave the name field and a focus when I get into the email field. Now what I can do is I can set blur code to say if there's nothing in there, take my cursor and put it right back into that field that I just left. And you can do that with code. I could even add a message on the right if I wanted to, or underneath it or above it that said the name field is mandatory. All right, here's some common control events. Well, when you get the focus, an on-focus event takes place. When you get the blur, an on-blur event takes place. These would be the places, like I said, you could enter that code if you wanted to force a user to remain in a certain field until they did something. Whatever you wanted them to do. All right, because this code is only as strong as you make it. All right, on click we've already looked at. On double click we've at least talked about. I have mentioned on change to you. So again, if I have a field that says name, and I type in there JEFF space SCOTT, that's 10 change events that have taken place. If I accidentally put 1 too many T's in there, and I backspace, that's now 12. Because there's 11 letters and 1 to remove one of the letters. If I change it from Jeff to Jeffrey, even more change events take place, etc. All right. And on select, as it says, the user selects text in a text box or in a text area. And they give you some examples here. Some of this is just stuff I've already talked about with you. All right. But as it says, input elements with a type set to submit or reset automatically submit or reset a form. When you validate data, regular buttons are often used. Why? Because you really can't do a lot of programming in a submit button or in a reset button. They're pre-programmed for you. So if you want something special to happen, instead of saying input type equals submit, you'll say type equal button. And then you'll call it submit, but you can put your own code in there. Because if the type is equal to submit, there's very little that you can do. other than provide a place to submit to. And if it says type equal reset, there's very little that you can do. But if you say type equal button, then it's, you know, it's all wide open. You can put anything in there you want to or need to put in there. All right. Then they come to this register application that's on pages 184 and 185. I would say, this is my opinion, for whatever my opinion is or is not worth. Look at this example, because what you're going to do for the test, it's not the same thing. It's not. But if you can understand this, you should understand what's going to be on the test. So what are they doing in here? Well, notice it looks like at least they put in a valid email. It looks like they put in nothing for the phone, and the phone is mandatory. All right. It looks like they didn't select the country. They did select a radio button. They did accept, the checkbox. That all makes sense? You clicked register, and it started to go through the form validation. Said, hey, that's a required field. You put nothing there. Hey, that's a required field. I can tell because the default is select the country. You didn't select one. All right. So again, I'm hoping I'm not wrong with what I'm about to say. You could all build this. Because you do build a form. It's got a few more fields in it than this. But when you take your test in a week, you have to build the form. All right. So that's the HTML. I'm not going to go over it because I think, like I said, it should make sense to you. All right. Then, as they always do in here, they put a little bit of CSS in. What are they doing? Well, notice they're putting in here the color is red. And what is that? They basically have a span here and here and here. I don't know if there's one here. I don't know if there's one there. But they put spans in there for error areas. If something is required and you leave it off, they're going to show you a message. The only thing I would have done, and it's totally fine what they did, I would not have only made it red, but I would have bolded it, just so it stands out. Everybody's different. All right. Then, as always, we've got the JavaScript. And the JavaScript is shown on page 187. And you'll notice if you turn to that page, or if I go here, it is the whole flipping page. All right. Please have a good look at this before next Monday. When? Do it whenever you want to do it. All right, but have it fresh in your mind. You may want to mark this. Remember, you do have the code for this. You were given this. You might even want to bring that up. So you've got something to use as a template or a helper or whatever you want to call it. So what are we doing here? Again, I'm taking for granted these first two lines. We're not talking about them anymore. So we're going down to here. Process entries. So notice in process entries, what is it? It's a function. And we've got a field in there, a Boolean field called isValid. We're assuming that it is valid. We're going to take isValid and we're going to set it to false if either you put nothing in the email field, or you put nothing in the phone number field, or you put nothing in the country field, etc. Does all that make sense? So notice what we're doing here. We're setting email. We're telling it to go out and grab whatever we put into that text box. Same thing with phone. Country, same thing. Contact. We're setting it equal to text. We're giving it a default value for that radio button. We're saying if the email is checked, then instead of setting it to text, we want to set it to email. If none is checked, we set it to none. All right, and then we've got this terms. So that's all the stuff that you saw. Well, I guess it's on the previous page, but hopefully that makes sense to you. Then we're doing our validation checks. Notice it's possible that isValid was already set to false, and then we're setting it to false again. Can you see that on the screen? And you might say, "Why? That I get it, but why are you doing that?" Do you have any guarantee that if you've got a form field that people are going to fill it out in the order in which you've got the fields in there? No. Maybe, for example, maybe you're filling out a form field and they ask for a social security number, and even though it's required, you try to figure out a way not to give it to them. Even if it's at the beginning and it's required, type of thing. I don't know. So what are we saying here? Well, if we left the email off, notice what we're doing. Next sibling.firstchild.node value. That's that area to the right where that red message appeared. All right. How do we know it's next sibling and first child and node value? Because of where it's placed on the form. All right. And then we come in here and we say otherwise, the email must be okay. Now, again, all we're doing right in this example is we're validating there's something in there. Again, they didn't do it here, but I would have used the trim function as well. Trim will remove any leading spaces and any trailing spaces. I don't know if in the example they have right here, if I hit the space bar once or twice, it may consider that to be valid. That shouldn't be valid. Trim will make sure that it's not valid. All right. Then they do a similar thing with the phone. Again, all they're saying is, was something entered? I believe I could put my name in for all of these and it would work just fine. Does that make sense to everybody? When they're asking for actual input. All right. Then they've got the country. All right. Then they do the same thing again with the terms. So they're doing pretty much the same stuff in here. All right. And what's the reset? Well, they're taking all the fields that are required and they're putting that red asterisk at the end of them. That's what these are doing. It's setting the focus to the email address because that's the first field. And what is this doing? Guess what? You know what this is doing. This is registering all those functions, correct? This is saying when you click the register button, call process entries. When you click the reset form button, call reset form. And make sure that when you start, the email address has got the focus. So that's the field. Is there anything in there that doesn't make sense? Because this is the time for you to ask. Okay, here's where it starts to get whatever. Because here is now what we're saying is we want to be able to take an existing website and we want to be able to add stuff to it and remove stuff from it. All right, or modify stuff that's in there, I guess, too. So as it says, besides working with existing nodes, remember that DOM, that document object model that we got shown at the beginning? We can add our own stuff. Now, technically, the way that HTML documents are set up, I don't think that you could add a sibling by head and body because those are the only two that are in there. But you could add anything you wanted to add in the head section and or anything you wanted to add in the body section, even while the program's running. And that's what they're saying here. So it says JavaScript lets you add nodes to and remove nodes from the document object model. You'll learn the easiest way to perform these operations in the next figure. Now, notice a couple things. They say easiest. That doesn't mean it's easy to do. That means in these authors' opinion, this is the easiest way to do this. If you're shown 3 or 4 ways to do things and somebody says, hey, Gabriel, this is the easiest way, you might look at it and say, hell no, to me, that's the hardest way. I'd rather do it this way. Then that's the way you should do it. You should do it in the way that makes the most sense to you. The bottom line is if there's 3 ways of doing it, and there's 8 of you in here, and 3 of you do it one way, 3 of you do it another way, and 2 of you do it another way, that's fine, as long as you get the same and the correct result. All right. First thing they talk about in here is inner HTML. Okay, do you remember that we had several examples in here where you did a document.write? Remember those? Okay, that's about the worst way to write to a web page that there is. And the reason for that is when you do a document.write, technically what it does is it's going to cause the page to be refreshed. And even if it just takes a second, you get a little blip like on the screen, etc. And sometimes if you've got a very intricate page with a lot of images or whatever in there, it might take a few seconds. It's not considered very professional. But you can use inner HTML to write anything you want to a web page. Now, most of the time it'll be text, but there's no reason you couldn't use inner HTML to write an image to a page, for example, if you wanted to do that. So it says figure 613. All right, that's, I guess, on the next page here. Okay, they start showing you the inner HTML property. And again, This is either, depending on your opinion, either a really good example or a really bad example. Because what are they doing? They're creating an image list. So imagine that I went on vacation and I've got a website, and then on the website, I want to go and show what I did on my vacation. That makes sense? And let's say I took 100 pictures. Probably, no one's going to want to take the time to look at all 100 pictures. All right? I remember the first time I went out to Colorado, and I saw the mountains, and I'm taking all these pictures. And I thought, man, this is just beautiful. And then after I got the film back, it was like I took about 40 pictures, and about 20 of them looked like the exact same picture. It was where you had to be there where it really made some sense. You know what I'm saying? All right. Even I went out to Utah and I went out to the Moab Mountains, but after a while, one mountain kind of looked like another mountain. I said, yeah, this is this mountain, and yeah, this is this mountain. People would say, how can you tell? They just kind of look the same. All right. But the point is, if I have 50 pictures, I might want to grab my top 10, and now I could create this image list, and I could create it in real time. In other words, I could add images to it or remove images from it as I saw fit. Does that make sense? And that's what they're talking about doing in here. So it says in the page before this, it says figure 613, which is what you see, presents the inner HTML property, and that's what you see right here. Sets or returns the HTML content of a web page. All right? It says the first example shows you how to add content to an HTML element. In this case, 4 images will be added to a UL element with an ID of image list. If you review the starting HTML, you'll see that the element contains no content. All right? You may or may not remember this, but one of the things that we have done is we have created like a blank div or a blank paragraph, and then when the program runs, depending on what you do, we added some stuff to it later. They're using the same type of principle right here. So if you notice in here, there it is. There's our UL, but there's nothing in it. There's no LIs. All right, so it is an unordered list with nothing in it. So now we're coming in here, and we're using JavaScript to populate or to add the LIs to it. All right. Now, let's face it. If I'm Joe Schmo and I've taken a vacation, I'm not going to do something like this. All right. If I do have something set up, I'll just grab the ones I want and just throw them in there. Something like this will probably not even make any sense. But hopefully you can look at it. You know what this means already. So what is this doing here? The onload. It's saying, hey, what I want to do is I want you to grab that thing called image list. And what is that? That's this. And I want in the inner HTML, oops, sorry, grab that and get that out of here. In the inner HTML, I want you to add an LI with the first image. Then I want you to add another LI with the second image, another LI with the third. Does it make sense to you that if for some reason we put this in the reverse order, then these 4 pictures here would appear in the reverse order? Does that make sense? All right. But guess what? You all know this from using tools like Flexbox, that even if you put them in the wrong order, you could set them up with Flexbox to have it look at the name, and you could still put it where it would show 1, 2, 3, 4, even if you put it in as 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So here's how you can get the content. And notice again, getting, meaning that the inner HTML is on the right-hand side of the equal sign. Here's how you can remove or reset the inner HTML content. So what is this doing? Can somebody tell me, what is this doing right here? Right there. What is this line of code doing? It's what? Yeah. It's basically getting rid of all the LIs we put in, correct? You're setting it equal to the empty string. You no longer have this. If they bring this up, it's going to say create image list, and there'll be nothing here. This should be returning, as it says, all the content of a particular element. All right. So again, to set, assign the content to the inner HTML. You can also use it to return the content. Then you can assign that content to a variable. Why would you want to do that? So that if you did want to, you could manipulate it programmatically. All right? Okay, how to view changes to the DOM in Chrome. Let's bring up a page. All right, this is that Brad Traversy thing in here. I'm going to hit the F12 key. Remember, hitting F12, that's going to bring this up. What is this? What? Yes, it's the Chrome Developer Tools. All right, you can also get to them from up here. You can go down to, now it says close, but if I close them and I go to here, I think it's under settings, but I don't, or more tools, I don't remember. I guess, yeah, more tools, developer tools. F12 is just the easiest, all right? But when we look in here, there's stuff we can see. What stuff? Well, we can look at elements. Notice what's in there. It's showing us all the elements that are on this page and what stuff is set to, etc. All right, Lighthouse, I don't deal with that. I don't know what that even is. Console, you kind of know. You can write stuff to the console and you can use it for debugging as well. All right. There's sources down here and there's different stuff that you can do that we're not going to talk about now. And there's network if you want to check your network performance, etc. All right. But it says in the last chapter you learn how to view the source code for a web page in a browser. You also learn that the code you see is the code that was initially loaded into the browser. In other words, it doesn't reflect the changes made by the DOM using JavaScript. All right. So in the example that they're giving here, they bring up the same thing that they just showed on the previous page, and they're bringing it up now, and then they're coming into the elements, and they're showing you how they're doing this. Now, one thing they didn't do, but that they could have done here, is they could have added these one at a time, not all together, not one after the other. And if they'd added them one at a time, you'd only see the one in here. Then if you went back and you added the second one and you brought it up, you'd see both of them. But the idea is you are creating them in real time. So as soon as you are putting them onto your page, they are immediately displayed. You have not had that power to do that before. Okay? All right. So as it says, if you're using Chrome, you can use the Elements panel of Developer Tools, that's the first one I showed you, to see the changes to the DOM that your JavaScript has made. You already know how to open and close the Developer Tools. The Elements panel, as it says right there, displays the nodes for a document. All right, so when you go back to that, so I'll just, this is it. I think this is what I had up. Elements. So I can go back to here, and I can do as much or as little as I want to do with this. Notice the stuff that's underneath here. It shows me any event listers that I have set up. And then I can click on here, and I can see where it is. I can remove it. Does that remove it? Yeah, it does. So if I want to set it up on my page that if I click a button, nothing happens, I can remove that. Now, it only works as long as I'm in here, because once I get out and get back in again, it should reset to the stuff it was originally. But you can go back in here. Notice there's DOM breakpoints that aren't set. There's properties. So I can say, okay, what's in my body? I can start looking in here. This is all the stuff that potentially I can change. And there's a little bit of it, as you can see. But I can not just do that. I can go back up to the top and I can say, okay, yeah, there's a body. Oh, elements, HTML elements. Oh, there's HTML elements. That means that all this stuff is changeable. That means that anything that says element, that stuff is changeable. Nodes, I can look at all of my nodes that are in here. I will tell you that if you're looking at this stuff and you go, I get it, I sort of get it, that if you go out, and I know I push this kind of stuff on you all the time, if you go out, well, I said school instead of schools. W3 schools DOM tutorial. How's that? They've got a whole tutorial on this. And they explain in here, look at that. Now, their shapes may be different. It really doesn't matter. All right? And they explain what you can do with JavaScript. And notice, DOM methods, DOM documents. This is another thing that if you're taking the test next week and you get stuck, go back to a site like this and look at it. All right? Because normally they will give you a code example. I'm not saying it's going to exactly answer your question, but it should hopefully at least lead you on the right path. All right. Finally, the last thing that's in the chapter here, starting on 192, is this register application with a table. So what's different between this one and the last one? Well, let's look at it. Previously, what they did was they gave you the errors right here. Now what they're doing is they're grabbing all the errors collectively and they're spitting them all out in one place at the end. They're showing you both the valid and the invalid values. Now, on a small form like this, that works fine. Could you imagine on a form where they asked you for 20 pieces of information? You'd have to be constantly scrolling up and down. That's why, not always, but most often, they'll either have an error message to the right or underneath, or occasionally even up above, depending on how it's written by somebody. All right? You will be expected when you take the test next week, you will do form validation, and if something doesn't validate, you will be expected to put an error message or show an error message in one of those places. That's going to be much of the test that you take next week. All right? So again, I think you could all write this, but notice right here that basically in this table there won't be anything when you first start because you don't know exactly what's supposed to be in there. All right? And they've got these spans. So as always, they show you the JavaScript. Guess what? Not that different from the one we looked at before. Look at the tests that are in here. This stuff, my guess is it's either is the same or it's darn close to it. Now notice what's different. Header equal message all the time. All right? Then if header equal message, what is that saying? We want to go down and we want to put all this stuff in there. And if it's not, we want to put all this in there. In English, what they're saying is if you found anything that was a problem, just show everything. What worked and what didn't work. And if there was no problem, submit it. But we're only submitting the form down here if all of our checks and all of our tests succeeded. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Now, that's it. Two more things that we're going to do. We're going to do one, and then we're going to take another break, and then we'll come back. But tomorrow, we're going to go over Chapter 7. And as they mentioned here in the last chapter, you learn some important DOM scripting skills. In this chapter, you get additional skills for working with hyperlinks, images, and timers. Timers are kind of neat because if you think about it, and I'm going to show you this in just a minute, we're going to go through that the copy that I gave you of that guessing game program. All right? And I didn't implement any timers in there, but I could have. For instance, maybe after you put a number in there and it gives you a message, too high, too low, or you guessed it, maybe I want to keep that message up for 5 seconds and then just have all that disappear. You can do that with timers. All right? So we'll look at that, like I said, we will look at that tomorrow. So before we take a break, I just want to take a second and go over again this guessing game program that I sent to you earlier, or late last week, whenever it was. So if you run it, you don't have to, but if you look at it here, this is the interface. And you may or may not agree, it's a pretty simple interface. H1, H2, or whatever, we put a little bit of CSS on in there, label, text box, label, text box, button, button, button. That should make sense. All right? And we're going to rewrite this after the break. We're going to write it together. All right? And we're going to use the DOM because there's not very much DOM stuff done in here. And I'm not saying as soon as we get done with this, oh, now it totally makes sense. I'm going to get 100% on the test. But it'll help, hopefully, in your understanding. All right? So again, when I run this, I put in a number, check the guess, it was too high. Now, you all know this, I've already eliminated 51 possibilities. Would you agree with that? The numbers 50 through 100 are not possible anymore. So if I keep going in half, so if I say 25, now I know the number must be between 26 and 49. Would you agree with that? So that's about 38 is about in the middle there. Oops. So 38. That was too high. So now I know it's between 26 and 37. All right, I'll try about 31. Okay, so now I know it's 32, 33, 34, 35, or 36. All right, unless I screwed up somehow. All right, so now it must be like 31 or 32, I would guess. Okay. All that makes sense? Now, a couple things from this. The way this one is currently set up, this is not a number field. So I can do this. And once I do, I get that. I immediately cleared it out, and I put the message there. As soon as I put a number back in, now I didn't do this, but I could have done it on the change event, that as soon as it saw a number, I could have made that invalid guess go away. All right? And also notice that's out of range, because you're supposed to enter a number between 1 and 100. So it's still an invalid guess. Now, probably I should have put in here, JavaScript guessing game, I probably should have put it like a placeholder in here that said, enter a number between 1 and 100. Or enter a number, 1 through 100, only valid options, or something like that. I mean, if you're creating something, you want to make it as simple for someone to use as possible. That's all I'm getting to. All right? So, I don't think there's anything that big in here, except when you notice that after my guess, I've got this. For the life of me, I have no idea why I called it spaces, but I did. And that's either going to hold an asterisk at the beginning of the program showing that that field is mandatory, or it'll hold invalid guess, or it'll hold nothing. Does all that make sense? And by making it a span, if I'd made this a div, it would have went on the next line. So if I wanted it to go below, I could do that. All right, I could have even just probably added, like for example, right here, a BR tag there, if I wanted it to go on the next line. But what I want you to understand is, technically, this input and this span are siblings. Does that make sense from what we talked about with the document object model? All right. And here's our buttons. Okay, that's no big thing. But let's take a look at the actual JavaScript code. And again, I'm not saying, you should all just thank God because this is it's written so well. No. Typically what I do is every semester I grab one I have and I rewrite it, just to keep myself kind of fresh, so to speak. So what do we have in here? Our uStrict, we've got two constants, one for our minimum, one for our maximum. All right. There's our aliasing. So all that stuff should make sense to you. This is our process entries function that takes up most of the screen. Then we've got a check your guess, which takes up most of the rest. A reset the form, which is going to set everything either back to, back to nothing, and it's going to give the focus. All right, our get a new number, which is just going to do that, and our onload. So this again says if you click the calculate button, call process entries. If you click the reset button, call reset the form. If you click the new number button, get a new number, and make sure when your program starts that the cursor is in the register or in the guess box. All right, so let's just take them from the top. So this is process the entry. So this means I click the calculate or whatever we call that button. All right, so what's this? This is grabbing the guess that I just put in. And notice I'm also converting it to an integer. It's supposed to be a number. All right, and then I say here, there's its value. All right, I'm immediately resetting its value there to nothing. But if I guessed it, did I have to do that one first? No. I did. Should I have? I don't know. The chances are when you think of it, if I'm playing a guessing game and I know how to play it, the chance of me guessing the right number between 1 and 100 on the first guess are not good. I think you'd agree with that. So it doesn't have to necessarily be in this order. I could have checked for being too low or being too high. Maybe I should have done this first. This is my validation right here. Does that make sense to everyone? Because I'm saying if I put in something non-numeric, or I put in something less than 1, or I put in something greater than 100, what am I doing? I'm taking that first node value, next sibling first node value, which currently has the asterisk, and I'm just setting it equal to invalid guess. All right? Then I'm trying to clear out what's in there, and I'm setting the focus. I'm trying to make the game as easy for somebody to play as possible, in other words. All right? So, otherwise, they put in a number, but it wasn't the right one. If it was the right one, we just call get new number, and all get new number does is it resets the form, it sets my number of guesses to 0, and this actually generates a brand new random number between 1 and 100. Does all that make sense? Okay. So if I get down to here, I know I made a guess, I know it was a valid guess, but it was a wrong guess. And I want to let the user know if they put a number in that was too small, or they put a number in that was too big. So that's in check your guess. This ret val, there's nothing significant about the name. A lot of people call ret val or return val or something like that just because you know exactly by looking at it what it's supposed to be. All right, if I guess too low, I set return value to your guess of whatever, your number was too low, try again. And this guessed it, that's something that's going to keep looping until I guess the right number. I set it to false. If it's too big, there. And if it's equal in here. Well, wait a minute. Did we already do that up here? Well, notice this says if guessed it. I don't know when I first put it in if I guessed it or I didn't guess it. All right. This is going to basically say, I'm going to actually check to see whether or not I guessed it here. But then I'm going to end up jumping back up into here later. And I just wanted to be sure that I'm getting a new number every time. That's what I'm telling you. All right. Resetting the form, like I said, should make sense, hopefully. Getting the new number should make sense. If this helps you, if the one that we're going to write after the break helps you, then bring those up, or whatever. All right. Last semester, I would be printing stuff out, and then a lot of people, for whatever reason, they just didn't want it, and that's okay. But there was just a lot of excess paper that was over here all the time, and that's why I don't want to do that. I don't want to waste paper at this place. All right. So what we're going to do then, I don't think I have to save it, is this is what we're going to do after the break. I'm just going to show this to you real quick. That was very quick, right? But when we run it, and all of the JavaScript is right inside of the same file, so we didn't have to bounce back and forth between files. We could put it in another file and it would work just fine. But this is what we're going to run after the break. All right. Now, I put this out there just so you knew whenever you ran it what the number was. You would not keep that line of code in there for the actual game because it wouldn't be much of a game. I just say 46 and boom, I'd be done. That'd be stupid. But I'm going to put in here. Now, notice this is the interface. You can see it's a little more colorful, etc. When I click in here, I'm going to say 50 because that's right in the middle. Notice what happens. The text turns purple, the button turns purple to show me that that guess was too high. Well, now I'm going to say 25. And notice now it turns blue, meaning that it's too low. Well, it was 46, so I put that in, and it tells me I guessed it in 3 guesses. And you notice that what was in here, that becomes a restart game button, and I click it, it gives me a new number, and it starts all over again. So what we're going to do after the break is we're going to write this, all right? And it's not really a whole lot of code. I don't know if I printed it out or not, but I am going to in just a minute. And it's around 100 lines, something like that, maybe 120, 121 lines. So I think what I'm going to do during the break is I'm going to print it out, just so you have a copy. All right? But if you want to type it in, type it in. And if you don't, don't. But we'll talk about it after the break. All right? Just because some of you type faster than others. Jameer said he was having some problems with his computer. So I don't want to hold that against anybody. All right? And I don't want anybody holding anybody up. So I will give you the hard copy. If you decide this is kind of cool, I'd like to type it in, then do that. And if you don't, then just don't. Not hurting my feelings any. Then there's going to be one other thing that we want to do. You now all have an account set up on the Rankin server, and it works. I tested them this morning. All right? So, and thanks to Mr. Gudmested for telling me what a fool I was. He didn't say that, not in those words at least. But I was doing something. I did 2 steps out of order. Since I did them out of order, that's why last week it wasn't working, except for yours, which already had been in the system. All right? But I had screwed up. And he kind of wrote me a nasty email saying, you ought to know how to do this because you've gone through it a few times. He said, but I'll tell you, you screwed up these steps. So I went back and redid those steps in the right order. Everything worked. All right, it is 10:01. Let's come back, please, at 10:15.